These days, DNA is the first thing that many think of when you mention ancestry. Spit in a tube, and they'll send you an outline of your ethnic background. Sometimes, as in the case of my friends the Mahonies, you might get an email about possible close relatives. Their story has a happy ending. Their mother got pregnant at a very early age, never mentioned to any of her kids, and gave the baby up for adoption. The Mahoney family was reunited with their older half sister through Ancestry in a miracle of fate and science, and they couldn't be happier together. Those of you who have seen Skip Gates' program, Finding Your Roots, will know how important and emotional this has been for African Americans and others with enslaved ancestors. Finding one's homeland can be such a powerful key to personal identity. On the other hand, you might discover that your cousin is a serial killer, so the jury is still out on the DNA program. But the more pertinent part of Ancestry for our purposes is its online access to transcribed, searchable historical genealogical documentation. Originally assembled by myfamily.com, ProQuest created an online resource available for both individual subscription with extensive personalized functions and options, and the Ancestry Library Edition, a somewhat simplified version which provides access to historical documents and photos, local narratives, oral histories, indices, and other resources in over 30,000 databases dating from the 1500s to the 2000s. Some of our libraries subscribe to Ancestry Library Edition, and needless to say, it is a boon for music catalogers and authority librarians. But getting started can be pretty daunting. So today, I'm going to provide some quick start tips for those of you who have always been interested but intimidated by the interface. We'll investigate options in the card catalog, a listing of all the individual specific record collections, and some basic search tips. My library is now buying a lot of 19th century music and ephemera composed by and or performed by African Americans, and perhaps your libraries are as well. So I will also provide an outline to some resources which I've found helpful in researching these creators and performers. There are a lot of links I'll be throwing around here, so I've created a Google Doc for quick reference with a bit.ly address of MOUG _ ancestry _ tips. I've also included additional links and explanations in this doc for your searching pleasure. Many confident searchers start right into the general search page. Sometimes that works all right, but for the usual kind of results list, not so well. Let's try my friend Ann Adams. 43,794 results. This is the point at which people often abandon Ancestry. Instead of leaping right into the general search, let's take a look at what is actually possible in terms of searching. I recommend that before you begin, always check whether your individual will even be represented in Ancestry. The card catalog, or as it's listed in the menu, New Collections, they are exactly the same thing, is where to start. Many new searchers aren't aware of how powerful this part of the database is. Now, I usually just skip to the keyword search, but I can see where the drop-down sort menu can be helpful. You can browse by database title or organize record collections by the number of records within collections. No need to waste your time on the one-hit record wonders. Now, the larger collection genres can also be of great use, depending on which kind of records you need. These can be filtered along the left side of the screen interface. The record collection titles aren't always the most intuitive, so limiting a browse search to birth, marriage, and death, for instance, can be helpful in orienting yourself to what is included in the search. The collection, location, and date filters are all faceted farther down the card catalog page. Each of these three filters are faceted further within each link, but just remember to clear them once you want to try a new search. The number of records can be quite important, as it will give you an idea of how complete the indexing has been for any particular record collection. Use this information to decide whether any given record collection is likely to include the records you want to see. Unless you are sure of the exact title, I'd recommend starting with keyword. You can also discover record collections that you weren't aware of, using keywords rather than exact titles. Some record collections are split up by date ranges, and didn't I feel silly once searching harder and harder for a record which was actually in the later set of record collections. Let's say you know exactly what genre of records you want to search. You can open any one of these record collections and search it separately from the general search collection to better focus a common name, for instance. Limiting the pool of options can help a lot to find birth or death dates with which you can then limit a general search. When getting started, it's a good idea to page down on the individual record collection page to the About section, which provides specific details about the contents. Information is always our friend and will help retain your sanity when you can't find a result you just know should be in there. Particularly important to check on German and Italian collections, I've found, when researching in the 19th century. Generally, I've had the best luck with American and British collections, but there are selected collections in a wide variety of other countries. This can be super important, like in the case of the 1890 US Census, most of which was tragically destroyed in a fire. Don't waste your time searching for something which simply isn't there in the first place. Identifying some possibles to help narrow your results is the hardest part with common names. Keep in mind throughout that there are two moments in the life cycle of these documents where transcription errors might creep in. When the initial documents were filled out, often by a third party who might mishear or misspell information provided orally, and when current transcribers are deciphering faded, often unfamiliar handwriting. I usually don't include middle initials in my first searches, as I find that initials are among the most frequently incorrect elements. I'll begin with a 19th century woman who compiled a volume of sheet music. These women are among the most difficult for us to identify by way of the usual resources, as the vast majority of bound volumes we have in our libraries were compiled by middle-class women who have otherwise vanished completely from the historical record. But using Ancestry can provide us with a surprising amount of information. Birth, marriage, and death records are the beginning and often suffice for our cataloging or authority purposes. But we can find census records, which can track where individuals live, with whom, and whether they listed any kind of occupation. Less frequently, we can find wills, which include a vast amount of information about the status and life of an individual, as well as their living context. Professional, social, or educational organization records are more commonly available for men, but they exist for women as well, and also provide more color commentary. Searching for compiler Mary Bartlett in the general search interface netted me 94,265 results, not including family trees, even more than Anne. So, since there are a lot of seller's stamps from Boston in this volume, I'm going to try for a Massachusetts birth record and see what I get. When working with bound volumes of sheet music like this, with a gilt-stamped label on the front cover and a relatively common name. I include a date filter. This volume has an outside printing date of 1840, so I go on the assumption that a woman compiling a volume would likely be between the ages of 15 and 35. So I'll add a filter of 1815 plus or minus 10 years. If I get no possibles, I'll widen my date filter later. And there she might be. Of course, I need to examine the record, compare it with its digital surrogate if there is one, and look for more confirmation information. The gold standard would then be to go back into the general search, armed with any extra information I've found here, and see if I can find 3 confirming records. This isn't always possible, but I'd like to try just to ensure that none of the mistakes mentioned above have crept into the one record I find. So with all of this in mind, and fully aware that I may have the wrong person altogether at this point, I try a general search, still without middle initial, and entering the birth year with 1 or 2 years of cushion, just in case. Birth location, Massachusetts. Now I get 70 results, a much more manageable number than the 94,265 results I got initially. After browsing through the results, I decide to add the initial to the search. And get a neat set of 5. Note the view links, which open out into a scan of the original document. It is always worth checking these out, both to check the spellings of everything and to look for more details. When searching for performers or composers, for instance, that profession area is invaluable for figuring out whether you have the right guy. I see that Mary has now moved to Danvers, which is a northern suburb of Boston, where she has clearly been buying her music. She is looking more likely as the owner of our bound volume. Another important resource in the suggestions is the suggestions Ancestry provides algorithmically to the right within individual records. These may be correct or they may be wrong. Each needs to be assessed individually. We'd need to do more work to be sure that this is our Mary, but we've got a good start. You'll notice what looks like a married name in these suggestions. This is another peril when searching for younger women. You may immediately identify the woman by her birth name, but what happens when she gets married? Fortunately, marriage records often provide that all-important bridge between 2 names, and you'll need that if you try to find a death date subsequently. Now let's go back to the general search screen and examine the way this interface works. Many of the same filters as in the card catalog are here by collection, location, and date ranges all around the edges of the search interface. When you type into any of these search boxes, additional filters will pop open. The date and location filters are self-evident, but the name filters are quite a bit more complex. When limiting to exact matches, records that contain a last name that is exactly what you typed will appear in your results. SoundX is a common algorithm used to generate alternate spellings of a surname. If you choose this option, any record that contains one of the SoundX variations for a surname will appear in your results. There are other name matching algorithms that Ancestry can use to help identify records to consider for your results. If you choose Sounds Like, Ancestry will identify appropriate algorithms that apply to specific data collections. And if a record has one of those names, Ancestry will return it into your search results. For example, if you are prioritizing Jewish collections first, Ancestry will default to the Deutsch Makotov, I knew I'd do that, phonetic algorithm. Similar, There are alternates and spelling variations that are commonly used, such as Cawelti for Cawelti. No, really, I'm serious. If you choose this option, Ancestry will return records with these alternates as well. Initials. Sometimes individuals in records are identified with just their first initials or the initials of their given and middle names. By including the initial option, Ancestry will return records that just have initials in the first name. So if you enter Mary, you'll also get records that have M as the first name. You can also use wildcards, asterisk, and question mark in your searches. The asterisk will match any number of characters, and question mark will match a single character. You may use the asterisk and question mark anywhere in your search text, but you must have at least 3 letters in total. So, asterisk OWN is a legal search, but asterisk WN is not. I'll include an example of this later. You can use wildcards within exact matches. If you choose the Soundex, phonetic, or similar options and use wildcards, then Ancestry will only apply the wildcards to the exact matches. I've put a link into the Google Doc to more detailed explanations of name search options. As an example of the capabilities of fuzzy searching, this is my great-grandfather, George P. Cawelti, whom I had looked for in the past partially unsuccessfully. It took our very own Robert Cunningham, genealogy specialist par excellence, to show me what I'd missed. And he has, I suspect, also edited the records since I last searched. Using the exact and sounds like search options, pulled together Cawelti, Cawelts, Cawelte, and Cawelti. Now here, I've done a general search for Gottlieb Engelbach, the music reviewer of Ackerman's Repository of Arts. But since I've seen his last name spelled several ways, I've used wildcards to cast the widest possible net. At the head of the results is a family tree. You need to be very careful with family trees, as most are unsourced and provide no citations for supplied information. They might be correct, but you'll have no way of confirming that. I always check when trees pop up in a search, just because some folks have already done a lot of the work I would have to have done myself. In this case, almost all of the facts are supported with links to their records in Ancestry, and you can navigate directly to the record in question to confirm the facts. You can go forward and back in the individual's genealogical tree to see if fathers or sons have the same names or identify other pitfalls. You'll notice that they don't include a firm death date up at the top in this tree, and in fact, the record within the tree itself also does not have correct information. This is a good example of why you always want to find more than one record to support birth and death information. In this case, further research revealed that this guy actually died June 1st, 1852 in Darmstadt, Hesse. Sometimes there are enough links in well-sourced family trees to satisfy my rule of 3, and I don't even have to take the time searching individual records. But caveat emptor. As an example of some more experimental searching that is possible within Ancestry, let's say I have a dedicatee that I'd like to research, but all I have is a first name and perhaps a last initial. Now we know that in Ancestry, wildcards only work with 3 letters, not initials. So I'll only search the first name. The waltz is copyright 1850, and I know the composer was living in Circleville, Ohio at that time. I searched the first name Jesse directly in the 1850 US Census, limiting to Circleville. As you will have already noted, There is a lot of guesswork to this kind of searching, and if you make the wrong guess at the beginning, you can really go down a rabbit's hole. But just take a deep breath and start over again with a new guess. Jessie was a common nickname for Jeannie at this time, and here we see an example of how Ancestry fills in nicknames and similar spellings. The last name begins with M, and Miss McQueen is very close to the composer's age. Checking the actual census records for each of them and Google Maps, I discovered that they also lived quite close to each other. More research is obviously needed to confirm, but this gives us a possible starting point, which otherwise would be completely impossible. The Learning Center provides several useful guides to some of the most problematic searching areas and is well worth reading through if you're looking for more challenging individuals. I would particularly recommend reading through the guides on African American and German searching tips. I had no idea, for instance, that Ancestry provides an entire, freely available, simplified searching interface to their exclusively African American records. The search page for the African American interface includes a search area, and paging down, you will find a lot of other valuable search tips. Content warning here, some of the vocabulary choices in these records, as well as throughout African American specific resources, can be upsetting. The Ancestry African American interface can also be tricky, as it doesn't include many options to narrow down a search. But if your first attempt doesn't provide what you need, page down to the bottom of the search results to find an option to add more information. Tell us more about James. Here I've searched James A. Bland, composer of a lot of important songs, including Carry Me Back to Old Virginia. Let's forget for now that he's available in several biobibliographies and guess when he was born based on when his songs were published. Navigating through to what is behind this aggregation of data doesn't provide itemized data sources. But with what I have here, I can now go over into the general search in regular Ancestry and see what is available there. In the general search, I put in his birth year and add initials to my exact search for his first name to catch records with both A and Allen as middle names. At the top of the search results is a family tree, which I examine first since it is clearly the correct guy. Not only is this family tree well sourced with several Ancestry links supporting each fact, it includes another useful feature of the family trees, external links. In this case, several newspaper links concerning Bland. Sometimes these links are proprietary. But you can copy the addresses out to access them through your library or through your local public library, etc. Moving beyond Ancestry just briefly, one resource I've found helpful as I've been learning about 19th century African American composers and performers is the International African American Museum Center for Family History. The IIAM includes significant resources with clear, concise explanations for use. In addition to fascinating blogs on a variety of subjects, many up-to-date links to other useful sites are also included. On the Google Doc, I've also provided a loose outline of the best records to search with links during different eras of African American life in America. Grateful thanks are due to Deborah Downey for her kind help with this. The resources cover the early 20th century and the Reconstruction era, records generated during the period of slavery in America. Now, I know there's an awful lot written in here, but it's all reproduced in the Google Doc. Records of those who were free during the slavery period in America and prior to 1800. I hope that I've given you at least an overview of how to search effectively in Ancestry. Just remember, the cart catalog with collection descriptions is your friend. Data can be incorrectly entered, so try not to take a single record as gospel. Wherever possible, apply the tried and true cataloger's rule of 3. Use the native fuzzy searching when you come up with nothing. It can be amazingly helpful. And now, in fear and trembling, are there any questions or comments? I'm sure that many of you have your own useful experiences to share.